So the question is, what's the difference between a regular penetrating stain and Bona Red Out? Well, you've got to remember with the penetrating stain that you've got both dyes and pigments that actually either penetrate into the wood and or lay in the soft grain area to lend color to the wood that it doesn't have itself. With Bona Red Out, we're actually kind of doing the opposite, is that we're taking away the color from the red oak or whatever species we're applying it to, so that the colors that we go over the top with don't have any tinge of red or pink coming up underneath. So these actually react with the reactives in the wood itself, don't lend any color right out of the jug, whereas a penetrating stain actually has extra colors that it's putting in the floor. So the question is, should we water pop before we apply Red Out to help with lapping? Actually, no need to do that. You really want to have the floor prepped just to 120 grit. If you pre-water pop the floor, it actually may cause some issues with part A and have some lapping problems and some darker gray areas from that. So just prep it to 120 and you're good to go. So the question often comes up, do I need to water pop the floor after applying Bona Red Out in order to get that water popped look with my stain? Remember that both part A and B have a lot of water in them, so after I apply both of those to the floor, my water pop out is already done. So it's ready to go after it's gone through the proper drying period. I can go ahead and apply my stain directly to the floor and I'll get that nice, even water popped look. Now we've got Red Out on the floor, and do I need to do anything to it before I add a Bona Waterborne Sealer to it? You may want to denib or smooth the floor so you don't have that rough water popped look to it. So to do that, we're either going to use a 1-inch red pad, a maroon conditioning pad, or even 120 grit Bona Diamonds on a couple maroon conditioning pads just to soften those up. All three of those methods will sufficiently smooth the floor to give us a nice even coat of waterborne sealer right over the top. So the question comes up, will my final grit sequence affect the reactivity of Bona Red Out when I put it on the floor? Whether you finish with 80, 100, or 120 really doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the reactivity of the product, but it may affect your actual application rate. So best practice is finish with 120 grit. That gives you a nice, smooth, even surface where I'm not going to get too much penetration and reduce my application rate. It'll help ensure that proper application rate of 450 to 650 square feet per gallon, and I'm ready to go. So if I've got metal outlet plates in the floor, if we've got a fireplace that has a metal transition on the bottom, or even if I've got some metal transition areas in the floor, Bona Red Out can affect and react with those metals. So you're definitely going to want to at least tape those off. I'd even be more careful around those and brush the Red Out carefully when I get to those areas. Avoid getting Red Out on any metal pieces. If you do, get them wiped off right away. You should be all right. But otherwise, any metal around the floor, make sure it's protected because you can have a reaction with either part A and or part B on metal components. So the question comes up about using filler and Bona Red Out. First thing you want to make note of is that Red Out will not affect the color of the filler. So if I've got a red oak floor that I'm trying to make look like white oak and I use red oak filler, or it's already got red oak filler in there, it's not going to be the same as the rest of the floor. Now, is that going to look funny or cause your whole floor to be bad? No, it is what it is. But you may want to do a sample area just to make sure that is okay with the rest of the floor and the color that you're trying to achieve. If you've got a brand new red oak floor that you're trying to make look like white oak, you might actually want to just spot fill that with white oak filler because that is the final color that you're going for. And if you start with that and we end up looking like white oak, then everything will match a lot better. So remember with fillers, just spot fill and understand that red out is not going to have an effect on the color of the filler itself. So on the question of can I dilute Bona Red Out to lessen the intensity and the reaction I get on the floor, of course you can, but if you're going to do that, make sure you use an equal dilution of part A and an equal dilution of part B. So don't put part A on the floor full strength and then part B on the floor half strength. Dilute them both to equal intensities. And understand that that is not going to affect your dry times or your activity times either, just because you're diluting it. So still give it the full 10 to 15 minutes of part A being on the floor before you add part B on there, and then give this full dry time either overnight or until I get to within 1% of my base reading that I took before I put either of them on the floor, to make sure everything's dry enough to go ahead and add my stain sealer or Bona finish on top. So the question comes up about batching multiple gallons together. Let's say we're working on a large floor where I'm going to use 4 or 5 or 10 gallons of A, and the same with part B. Best practice is to take each of those and batch them into a single container so that I make sure that I'm taking each of those, batching them into one to make sure we get an equal mixture on each one and that I don't have any variability from gallon to gallon. More important on that though, especially with part A, with the way it settles out, is if I go back to that batched container, make sure you stir that up real quick before you pour any of it off, because especially part A will tend to settle out pretty quickly. So you don't want to accidentally pour any off, have that separated from what you had poured in there before, because then I'm going to have unequal reactivity on the floor. So best practice is batch things together with multiple gallons, but again, make sure you stir it up before you pour any off from your batch container to make sure that you've got a fully mixed product that you're putting on the floor. So the question comes up, do I need to stir Bona Red Out periodically during the application process? And you definitely should. We've really seen with part A that it can settle out pretty quick. I mean, within a couple minutes, you've got a lot of settling to the bottom. But it's pretty easy to keep it stirred up. If I'm using a paint pan or I'm using a bucket, every time I stick my roller or whatever applicator I'm using down into it, make sure you just kind of use that as your stir stick, slosh it around a little bit to make sure that gets stirred up again. But make sure you do that every time because, like I said, especially part A can separate pretty quickly. So just make that a regular part of your application process. Every time you stick that applicator in there, stir it around, get some more in there, bring it out, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so the question comes up about my applicators and can I use them again? One, make sure that you keep your applicators separate. So I'm going to use a separate roller, cut-in pad, brush, or whatever for part A. Completely different set of applicators for part B because I don't want to mix those two chemicals together in my applicators. When I'm done applying both of those, go ahead and wash your applicators out with water and then just keep them damp. So if you throw them in a Ziploc bag, that tends to work great. And if it's going to be a little while before you use those again, go ahead and throw them in the freezer. Because we're trying to keep them damp, if it's over a period of a couple months, we may get some mold and mildew growth in there, mainly from the water we use, not from these chemicals themselves. So wash your applicators out with water after you're done with them. Keep them damp in a Ziploc bag. Throw them in the freezer if it's going to be a couple months before you use them again, and you should get a lot of applications out of just a single set of applicators. So the question is, what nap roller should I use? And just to reemphasize, we really recommend a 3/8 inch nap roller, which any of the Bona rollers, the blue candy stripe or the regular all white microfiber, they're both 3/8 inch nap. If you don't have access to one of those, you can always go get a 3/8 inch nap microfiber at one of the big box stores. Those will work great too. And if you have to, you could go down to 1/4 inch nap, but you just want to watch your application rate. Again, calculate it and make sure you're getting 450 to 650 square feet per gallon. If you're not putting on enough and you won't get quite the effect that you're looking for. But in a pinch, you could use a 1/4 inch nap as well. Best practice though, 3/8 inch nap, and you should hit your application rate and have a beautiful red out application. So good question on, can I just use a cut-in pad to apply this? Do I have to use a roller? You may notice if you try rolling it that, the faster this thing spins, you may be flinging little droplets all over the place, not just on the floor, but up onto the wall, on your base, on your trim, if there's a fireplace with a metal insert, up onto that metal, places where you don't want the red out to go. So by all means, you can definitely use just a cut-in pad to apply. I think the trick there is still work out of a bucket and or a paint tray, and make sure that you're keeping the products mixed up, especially part A. It's easy to do with the roller because I'm kind of dunking it down in there. Just make sure you do the same thing with your cut-in pad, spread it out, feather it back out or smooth it out so you don't have any, big standing puddles or anything like that, and you should still have a great application. So great question on ideal application rate. Again, this is really the key to using these products and getting good results, getting it the first time, the effect that you want to have as far as taking the pink and red out of the floor. So ideal application rate, 450 to 650 square feet per gallon. One of the best ways to get that is roll it on with a 3/8 inch roller, smooth it out with your cut-in pad, and that should get you right in there at the heavier rate, about 450 square feet per gallon. Depending on how I do my final sanding, 80 to 120, recommended is 120. That's going to also affect the amount of application rate, penetration, everything else. So really our recommended best practices, sand it to 120, use a 3/8 inch roller, use your cut-in pad to smooth it out, and you should have a beautiful floor. Okay, so typically just one coat of A and B is all you're going to need on the floor. But sometimes the question comes up then, can I do multiple applications on a floor? Could I do 2? Could I do 3? Again, typically we're just recommending 1, 99% of the time. That's all you're going to need, especially if you put it down at the proper application rate, you get that full reactivity. So I could go ahead and do another coat of both A and B. It might get the floor a little bit lighter, but not much. So yes, you can do a second coat, but remember, typically 1 is all you're going to need. More importantly, if I put it down at the right application rate, I shouldn't need more than 1 coat. Okay, so you've put down part A and you're noticing the floor doesn't look real even. You've got some blotchy spots, maybe you've got some start-stop marks from your applicator. As long as you clean the floor and stuff like you were supposed to, probably no time to get worried right now, because usually the addition of part B over the top of that is going to even everything out. So don't do anything to the floor yet. Go ahead and put on your good application of part B, and then if you still have blotches and dark spots and stuff after that, we'll come back and take care of those individually, but go ahead and do the whole floor with part B, and that should take care of most of it. Okay, so sometimes this happens. Maybe we got a new guy on the job. Maybe you yourself made the mistake and put down part B before you put down part A. Don't panic, let it dry, same thing. Go ahead then and put down part A, let that dry out, see how the floor looks. Usually you're still going to get some of the same bleaching effect. It may not be as intense. So after everything dries out, you may see that now I need to go back and put on a second coat, starting with part A and then finishing with part B like you were supposed to. But hey, sometimes mix-up happens. If you do accidentally put down part B first, don't panic. Go ahead and put down part B, assess the floor after that, see if you need another coat. So some guys, when they see Bona Red Out in part A and B, may think, well, I'm putting them down, they're reacting with each other anyway. What if I just mix the two components together, put down a single coat? Definitely do not do that. You can create a very dangerous situation. You can get immediate off-gassing from these products as they do react with each other. And if that solution is mixed up in a single gallon, you can really get a lot of off-gassing and pressure buildup in one of these where the gallon might actually explode. So don't mix them together. Put down part A first. Let it start drying 10 to 15 minutes, then part B. Never mix the two together wet and try to put them down as a single chemical application. Okay, so you've applied part A and part B. You notice that you had some part A left, or more of it than you had part B, which should tell you you probably underapplied part A versus B. Take a look at your floor. What do you think? Again, you're going to get some of the same reaction, but if you don't apply them in equal amounts, it's going to be less intense or less of a reaction. But let's assess it when we're done, right? It may be that you're fine with that, or this may be one of those instances where you want to go back and apply a second full coat of each to get that more intense reaction with parts A and B. All right, so another question on under application. What happens if I underapply part B, or I underapply both part A and B, and I still notice some red and some pink peeking through there, or I've got some gray discoloration still on the floor from blotchiness because of part A and then not enough of part B. The fix to this is just go back and abrade the floor with 120 grit, then apply both A and B again liberally, 450 to 650 square feet per gallon, then you should be fine. But make sure you're kind of monitoring as you go and you're putting down a good application rate, fully wetting out the floor. We don't want standing puddles, but use enough of the product to get that reaction that you need. So this question comes out of, sometimes this is just how the job runs. Either you've got a really, really large job, or you've applied part A, you're waiting for it to dry that 10 to 15 minutes to have that reaction time. Something pulls you away from this job, so you don't get back to it till tomorrow morning. So now part A is fully dried. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put part B on it, but am I gonna get that full reaction? So we won't get quite that same intensity that we would if we would let part A dry just the 10 or 15 minutes and then put part B on top of it. They react better when they're both still a little wet, but we'll still get some nice reaction with the floor and a lot of that pink and red coming out. So again, assess it, go ahead and put down your part B, assess the floor once it's dry, and if you need to, you can go ahead and put down a second coat. So it doesn't need to be that this is always wet, and then you put down part B. If something happens and A dries overnight, go ahead and put part B down, assess the floor, and go from there. Aside from your application rate, using a 3/8 inch roller, putting it on evenly, giving it right dry times, reaction times. The two biggest things I noticed about using this product the first time was one, the need to make sure part A stays mixed up. But easy to do when you're using your roller, right? Whether I'm dipping it down into my bucket or I'm putting it back into the paint tray, just work it around a little or slosh it up and down in your bucket just to make sure that part A stays nice and mixed up. Because it's hard to see from the top when you're working a room that it might have settled out. Also, before you pour any new product, when you're using part A, make sure you mix it up before you pour more product out to continue with that job. The second thing is because these products have the consistency of water, If you're used to putting down, water-based sealer, finish, etc., be careful when you're working around the walls and stuff with this, because when you first put it in the bucket, take it out, push it out towards the wall, you may notice some streams of product come rushing out from the roller. We want to keep them from going underneath our trim work, down into our expansion spaces. Everything else, one, they're not going to do us any good there. They can only cause problems with, water or that moisture pooling up in those areas. So just be gentle with it. When you first take it out of the bucket, maybe roll it out a little bit right close to yourself so you can see the amount of product that's coming out of there, then work it out from there. But any little bit amount of pressure you put on that roller when you're rolling it away from yourself, it may take you a while, but you'll notice, don't do that, because I've got stuff rushing out of there, headed towards my trim work and into the expansion spaces, and that doesn't do me any good. So keep part A mixed up. Don't push streams of product out ahead of yourself, out of the roller, into your expansion space or under your trim work, and you really should have a nice, smooth, and easy application. For some of you working in some of the colder climates around North America, question comes up on, is Bona Red Out freeze-thaw stable? While it is, we don't recommend storing it in temperature extremes on either side, so not too cold, don't let it freeze, and not too hot. And either way, we always want to bring the products back to room temperature before we apply them. So if this does happen to freeze out in your van, it's like our waterborne finishes and sealers. It's a little more sensitive while it's in that partially frozen state, where you've got ice crystals actually floating around in the solution, and that may make some things crash. So if you've got frozen product, set it aside, thaw it out completely at room temperature, then check the product when you pour it out to make sure you don't have any coagulation or anything like that. If everything looks fine, just continue mixing it up. Go ahead and apply it to the floor. You should be good to go. But take care of your products, right? Don't let them freeze. Don't let them get too hot sitting out in your van. Always bring everything back to room temperature before you apply. Should be good. All right, so always a good question on shelf life. Bona Red Out Part A and Part B. Shelf life is 1 year in an unopened container. And once you've had them open, so let's say I've got half gallon of each that I'm saving up, that is where I think really storage temperature becomes even more critical. So just keep them at room temperature, and they should last, several months before losing any kind of reactivity or effectiveness. So 1 year in an unopened container. Once they're opened, just make sure you are a little more guarded on what kind of temperatures you're storing them in. Product should be good to go. Okay, so this question is a good one, especially for you guys who are maybe used to using Part AB wood bleach. Because one of the negatives of that is it actually melts the lignin, which is kind of the stuff that glues the fibers of wood together. That's also where that color comes from. It melts those, and that's why when you bleach a floor, it actually makes the surface a little soft. One of the big advantages to Bona Red Out, it does not affect the lignin at all. So you're maintaining that structure in the surface of the floor. I don't have an extra soft surface now. I've still taken the color out, but I've maintained the structural integrity of that floor. I've still got a nice solid surface and don't have to worry about any of those negative effects that I might get with wood bleach. All right, so let's talk about how do I repair a spot? If I've gone ahead, put Part A and Part B down, now I've got, either a dark spot in the floor or maybe a really dark board or something that just doesn't look right, and I want to reapply some product. One, you can go ahead and tape that board off, but what you've got to be careful with when applying Part A and B, if it runs under that tape and gets stuck there, you actually may have then some blotchy issues or some ringlet issues from this product getting trapped underneath that tape. So a better idea is we're going to go ahead and hand sand with 80, 100, 120 grit, that area just to kind of smooth things out. And just like we're doing a stain repair on regular wood, I'm going to take my sandpaper and kind of chase that grain to help hide my repair. The same thing I'm going to do then when I apply part A and B. I'm just going to apply it with a brush, but I'm going to brush that out and chase the grain or feather out the application of A and then feather out the application of B to just hide that repair within that surface. Then I may even come back over the top, lightly hit it with a maroon pad or anything else if I do have some shadowing around the outsides, just to smooth that thing out with the grain of my wood. Now I've put part A down. You're going to tend to see these brown, gray color come out of the floor. And then when I put part B down, it really neutralizes all that. So after I've put B down, what if I still see some kind of grayish brown areas in the floor? It's probably telling me I didn't get the right application rate or not liberal enough with B over those areas. So you can go ahead and just apply some more B over those areas and see if that takes care of it. Again, I'd probably do that just with a brush and feather that out into the floor. I don't want to put a puddle just on those areas and let it sit there. So apply it liberally on those spots that you're concerned about, but then feather it out into the floor. You should have a spotless repair area. Okay, so this issue with the floor kind of looking chalky and hazy, and maybe it's just that after I put part B down and it dried, I can really see some chalky, hazy applicator marks. How do I take care of those, right? You don't need to put another whole coat of A and B over the floor. You might just need to rinse the floor. So we're simply going to do that with a mop bucket and a ring sponge mop. And we're going to dip that mop cover. We're going to scrub off that section of the floor and then just work sections of the floor all the way throughout. And the only important note there is probably every 100 to 150 square feet, I want to change my water out, meaning I'm pouring the dirty water in that's coming off my sponge mop. I'm going to put new water in the bucket and then continue on with the job that way. So do a rinse using a sponge mop and bucket and clean water. Change that water out every 100 to 150 square feet, and that chalky appearance and or those chalky stop-start marks should go away, and your floor will be ready now for stain, sealer, or finish.